Hi, and welcome to Classical Stuff You Should Know. We're a podcast that talks about the classical world, so it would be literature, philosophy, art, politics, whatever's floating our boat at the moment. And our goal is to bring that to the masses in a way that isn't completely awful, that you might kind of enjoy a little extra education in your life. And I am joined by my two compatriots, Graham Donaldson.
Hello.
And Thomas Magby.
Hi.
My name is AJ Hannenberg, and we are coming to you from sunny Austin, Texas. And today we are talking about what I think is one of the most important things in any conspiracy theorist's arsenal, tinfoil.
Yeah,
we
100%.
can make hats out of it, protects our brains from alien waves, probably won't be abducted if you're wearing a tinfoil hat. And it's also great for grilling vegetables. Really, it has a lot of uses. I'm a big foil guy.
Yeah. I was a little surprised you wanted to do a whole hour on that, but...
Well, you laugh.
I'm expecting he's going to talk about the process by which you create foil.
I would love to find that out.
But you laugh, but tinfoil could have many uses. Like, can't you make like a Faraday cage out of tinfoil? Or
I just said it's got so
very
many
positive
uses.
things. He's not making fun.
Oh, okay.
It's like one of the top, like I said, it's a top tool in the conspiracy theory.
I don't always
arsenal.
wear a tinfoil hat, but I keep one around.
But when I do.
I keep one around for special occasions.
I wear a normal hat, but it has a lining of tinfoil.
Yeah, naturally.
Yeah.
I mean,
You can't wear all tinfoil. People
that's
laugh.
right. Well, is it really true that if the sun has like an explosion, it could fry our electronics? Is that a real thing, or is that just like internet crazy little talk?
An EMP, an electromagnetic.
But is that real?
Yes.
I don't think it would be the strength you'd need to fry.
What is it? A coronal mass ejection? Is that what it's called?
I
Something like
forget the
that.
name of it, but I mean, you can anyway.
Listeners, if the sun can kill our internet, write us before it's too late, and let us know. Anyway, we are talking about foil today. Not quite the kind of foil that Hanover was talking about, although tinfoil is interesting. Actually, fun Donaldson family fact: we have not bought a roll of tinfoil in 11 years of marriage because Amanda saves tinfoil and washes it and dries it, and she reuses tinfoil. I know. It's the weirdest thing in the world, but she just
It's
can't
like how
bear.
my mom saves all the wrapping paper from all the presents.
Exactly.
Shout out to mom.
No.
I'm not sure we've bought wrapping paper in forever.
Exactly.
Because she'll cut the tape carefully and then preserve it.
Yeah.
But you keep the wrapping paper.
Yeah.
You keep the aluminum foil somewhere.
We keep the aluminum. Yeah, we have it. So when it's cleaned, we fold it and keep it in a drawer. And then when we need to foil something,
Absolutely not.
now eventually the foil can get so sully that it has to go away. But then
can.
it's just you just keep your antenna up. So if you have
Is the antenna made
foil-
of?
Yeah, thank you. There it is.
and it's much easier when we live in a place where like there's a proliferation of breakfast tacos that are wrapped in foil all the time. So anyway,
Well, then you have little tiny pieces, though.
you got to clean it.
That's not a lot of tinfoil to work with.
I know.
It's enough.
It's enough. It's enough. Okay. Anyway, foil. So no, the foil we're talking about is a literary analytical tool, or a literary analytical. Yeah, it's a tool wherein you can sort of compare two characters. It may seem kind of simplistic or dull, but it actually, I think, can end up being a really powerful thing that gets you talking about a text, talking about a story, where you can now elevate it beyond just some sort of like academic way of talking about a book,
right.
But you can actually sort of bring it into talking about it on a human level, and you can even be talking about it in regards to yourself. I even think that literature ends up being a foil for us, but we'll get to there at the end. Now, I have in my hands here the Handbook of to Literature, the 10th edition, by the venerable William Harmon and Hugh Holman.
I think AJ's going to go get his copy right now.
Yeah, AJ, the Handbook of Literature is a fantastic book.
Let me go. I'll go grab mine from the car.
Please do.
Yeah, I'll be right back.
Basically, what this is the Handbook of Literature is. There you go. We got our own.
Well, is this the same version?
It's just a dictionary.
No. You have the 7th edition.
Yeah.
8th edition.
8th
please,
edition,
please.
sorry. Although, Graham, 12th.
Oh, look at that. What happened to Holman? It just says William Harmon on it.
Maybe Holman got ditched. Is there some big literary scandal?
Anyway.
that we didn't hear about?
Way more. This is
huge.
So the entry for foil is very brief, and I will read it. So a foil, literally a leaf of bright metal placed under a jewel to increase its brilliance.
I don't think
I
don't think that's what we're talking
like gold
about.
foil. That's not what we're talking about.
Okay.
Okay, but so that's literally what they're talking about. In literature, the term is applied to any person who, through contrast, underscores the distinctive characteristics of another. Thus, Laertes, Fortinbras, and even the players, all of whom are willing and able to take action with less reason than Hamlet has, serve as foils to Hamlet. So they gave you this great example, and the example is of these characters acting as foils to Hamlet in Hamlet, and that's true. So we're just going to talk a little bit about Hamlet. We're also going to talk a little bit about foils in Crime and Punishment. If you are less familiar with these plays, with these books, Hamlet and Crime and Punishment, I mean, you'll still get something out of this podcast, but you may want to listen to previous episodes where we sort of do synopses of those books. But we're going to be sort of talking about these characters in order to sort of highlight their foildom. Hannenberg, do you have anything different in yours?
Nope, same thing.
It's the exact same entry?
I have the feeling they just change the page numbers around and sell another edition. Know what
That's
I
how
mean?
you do it.
It looks like so. C. Hugh Holman died in like 1981.
Oh, there you
so that might have been. Anyway, that might have been the reason he's not on the book anymore.
go. Because he's
I don't think his contributions are still
been
in
dead
it.
longer than I've been alive?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. So, comparing characters. When you have a character in a story, they have actions, they're doing things. If you are analyzing that book and if you look at other characters around them and see that they are in similar contexts or are in similar have similar sort of decisions that they have to make and they're doing them in different ways, comparing the differences between those characters is often a very fruitful exercise. So I'll give you an example from Hamlet. I'll give you examples from Crime and Punishment. So the example that they gave with Hamlet in the handbook here makes sense. So Hamlet is a character who is making a giant, going back to Megby's last week's episode, moral decision about whether or not he should enact revenge on his murdered father. So he is trying to make a decision as to whether or not he should kill the man who killed his father, and he has a lot of sort of moral hangups around it, and also even just like questions about why should you even do anything in this life. There are other characters who are in fact in the exact same position. So by the end of the play, Laertes has a murdered father by Hamlet, and Fortinbras has a murdered father by Hamlet's father.
Right.
And so you have these two men who also are in the same position of Hamlet. They have reason to act and to take revenge, and they're going about it in different ways than Hamlet is. So let's analyze Laertes. Laertes comes in and he is willing to kill anybody who even remotely, possibly has any connection to his father's murder. And Laertes, it's quite clear the way that he's talking, is even willing to kill somebody who he is only like 5% sure did it, right? Like he's willing to kill Claudius even though there's the king, even though there's no a rhyme or reason that Claudius murdered him. Laertes comes in hot-tempered and is willing to throw down at a moment's notice. He is somebody that is not thinking and he's willing to act. This is in complete contrast to Hamlet, who is spending the entire play hand-wringing and wondering whether or not he should do this thing or not.
Thinking too much, not getting anything
Thinking
done.
too much. All right.
He's an overthinker.
Obvious contrasts. And the question you ask is one man better than the other? Fortinbras has laid up...
Is there an answer to that? It seems Laertes is worse.
You would seem, yeah, and I think Laertes is worse than Hamlet. And I think that's fair. You would look at Laertes and you would say, this man is headstrong and is going to get a lot of innocent people killed.
Right.
And Hamlet isn't, except Hamlet's overthinking gets innocent people killed. Whoops. So the thing he was trying, he actually ends up doing the thing that we probably assume Laertes would have done, which is kill innocent people.
Sure.
I don't know. I like Laertes' way.
Just come on in and stab.
Probably because I'm naturally a Hamlet.
Yeah.
So just
so you look at
getting
Laertes
stuff
and...
done. It also feels very American.
So
like,
hold
heck
on
with
to
whoever.
that thing that you just said, that I'm a natural Hamlet, because I think that's going to end up being the launching off point for... You're wearing black already. For us talking about this with real life people, us. Contrast that to you have a character like Fortinbras, who, if you sort of read closely, you realize is hatching this very well-laid, masterful plan in the background. He is amassing an army. He is pretending that he's taking his army through Denmark to go do something else, but in reality, he's
we're going to go take over this other land. It's no big deal.
Oh,
Pay no attention.
Can we march our army to go invade Poland? We're totally not going to invade you guys,
Right.
even though I have a natural ancestral grudge against you. We cool?
I
Awesome.
swear we'll just go right through.
And Claudius is like, awesome.
Come on in, boys.
Come on in. Done.
Yeah.
And so by the end of the play, Fortinbras comes in, has a clean sweep of Denmark, and he just shows up actually when everyone has murdered when everyone is dead, and he's like, "Whoa, this place looks worse than a battlefield."
It actually doesn't it not make clear whether or not he's there to take over? He just kind of rolls in.
Well, he fires off.
visit-
The thing is, there's cannon fire, so you get the sense that he started a siege.
But
Oh, really?
But
Yeah.
won very quickly.
But
When
one
is the
very
cannon
quickly.
fire?
It happens. When the murder's happening, Horatio and Osric note that there's cannon fire and Fortinbras here.
Oh, and then Fortinbras rolls in, and Hamlet's like, "Take over."
Yeah.
And he's like, "Oh, sure. I didn't intend any other."
But Fortinbras has sort of measured, clinical, and also he seems to have the support of his troops. And everything that is sort of said about Fortinbras is that he's sort of worthy and noble and, should be in charge. Even Hamlet, when he's done, he's like, yeah, Fortinbras can be in charge. He's probably pretty good at this. And you contrast that to Hamlet, who sort of sours all the relationships around him. Yes, maybe the people like him, but the people like him not because they see him as a noble ruler who maybe they would want to be their king, but they like him because he's like witty and funny. And
You never know what Hamlet's going to do. What a card.
And he's an actor through and through, so he's always like hamming it up to the audience, and so that's a likable thing. But it's not likable in the sense of I am glad to be under this person's command because he is so good, like a Cyrus the Great or somebody like that, right?
So he was a ham? I wouldn't say he was like a full ham.
Yeah, he's a little Hamlet.
He's a Hamlet.
He's a little Hamlet. He's just a little small ham, right? Okay, so then the character of Fortinbras serves as a foil to Hamlet. Laertes and Fortinbras vis-a-vis Hamlet's moral decisions. You can extend it further. Hamlet is pretending, and in many cases is sort of flirting with Crazy Town. And he says, I'm going to pretend to be mad. And everybody who talks to Hamlet is like, yeah, he seems crazy, but there's like method in his craziness. He's like saying true things while being crazy. Right. And that is a powerful thing to do, is that if everybody thinks that you're just a big jokester, you can say true things. This is why people will go and listen to stand-up comics and have stand-up comics like actually roast their way of life and be like, oh, isn't he great? Right? Because he's just the funny man.
Right.
And Hamlet is just the funny man. Hamlet is also, and by everybody thinking he's flirting with crazy, he can say the real things. Okay, at the end of the play, Ophelia also goes crazy. It's also unclear if Ophelia is not crazy in the realm of like straitjacket poo flinging crazy. Like if she's not completely broken, her mind isn't so broken that she is nonsensical.
Right.
Because the things that she says are also pregnant with truth, as they say it in the play. That when you listen to her, it has the form of meaning, even though it's wrapped up in seeming madness. So Ophelia's madness is a foil to Hamlet's madness. Hamlet is using it as sort of almost like a political tool to try to like stick it to power. And Ophelia is using it kind of in a different way. Hers is Hamlet, who I loved, killed my father, who I loved, and her heart is now torn in two directions between being sort of kicked to the curb by Hamlet and also the untimely death of her father. Right. And her madness has this tinge of this is what you get for basically for playing the game. This is what you get for believing the fairy tale that your prince will come and marry you, and you sort of listen to your dad, and he said to be chaste and good, and that you're. And if you sort of follow the rules and be coy and be beautiful, then the boy will love you and marry you. And I did, and the boy killed my dad and rejected me.
Yeah.
And now she's mad. She's gone crazy with it. But And so her last scene where she is crazy, she also spends the time sticking it to everybody in subtle ways. Her madness is a lot more tragic than Hamlet's. I personally don't know how the foil of Ophelia's madness, how we can really sort of use it to contrast with Hamlet's madness, but it is there. And the fact that Shakespeare has these characters who are going through similar things, the death of my dad has given me license to be crazy in public and tell people how I feel about them, right. Both Hamlet and Ophelia. They both have this, but in their differences, we can maybe make sense of the nature of Hamlet's madness and Ophelia's madness. I'll give you another example of Crime and Punishment, and then we can say, like, okay, so why are we doing this? In Crime and Punishment, you have characters that are all in very similar kinds of situations. There's the character of Sonia and Dunya, and Sonia is a poor girl from a family that is in dire financial need, and so she has to go and sell herself as a prostitute in order to make some money for the family. She is meek, she is mild, she is good-natured, she is like tremblingly sad. She's like a scared little deer the whole book. And she is sort of doing this horrible sacrifice for her family. Okay. We have the character of Dunya, who is Raskolnikov's sister. Her family is in dire financial need. But they are of sort of like a higher class than Sonia. So Dunya is going off, and she is marrying a dude for money that she doesn't love, and he's kind of like this pompous boob, and he wears purple gloves, and he wears purple gloves.
Excuse me, he didn't wear them, he carried them.
He carried the lavender gloves because they were too nice to wear. Fair enough. But he is kind of like pompous, and he curls his hair, and
he kind of showboats when he first arrives. Mm-hmm. He talks about, the young are so useful because they have, I don't know, the progress is so good. They have such good opinions.
He has the "what is up, my fellow kids," right?
Yeah, exactly. And he sort of showcases all his knowledge, and Raskolnikov just gives him a dressing down, and he gets all flustered and offended.
But anyway, he is clearly like kind of a dork of a person, and being married to him is obviously mercenary.
Well, it's even worse because he says, we should
go for it. Yeah.
He says that he wants to marry a destitute woman because then she will always look on him as her benefactor. Yeah. Like, I want to marry somebody poor because then I'll I always get to hang it over her head.
Yep. She'll bring me my slippers and she can't talk back, right? Like, because she knows where she came from. It's horrible.
It's really disgusting.
Okay.
He's not a great person.
Now, it's not of the same quality as Sonia, who is just going out and being a prostitute to like drunk peasants. But it is of a similar kind of thing. All right, there's two characters
self-sacrifice for the sake of family.
But they are both self-sacrificing themselves and they both sort of are held up as these selfless characters. Okay, you keep those on sort of one side of the equation. On the other side of the equation, you have a character like Raskolnikov. Raskolnikov is willing to kill other people for getting money. He is selfish. Like he is saying that he's sort of utilitarian. If we want to go back to Thomas's last episode, we were talking about ethical frameworks. Right. He is willing to kill others for cash so that he can sort of like make his life better. And he dresses it up like a virtue. Yes. That if she's worth dying. She's a general drag on society. If I can take her money and do good with that money, I will. I'm this good person. Right. I can sort of have more utils in the world. Right. Sure. Okay. Raskolnikov has a pretty extreme view of this kind of utilitarian thing. Luzin, the guy who's marrying Dunya, also has a utilitarian view of the world, but his is a lot more like genteel and respectable, but it's still utilitarian. If I live my life completely under self-interest and gather all of my money together and become super rich, well, then I can go do beneficial things to poor people, like marry them. And that they so that they have to, that they are beholden to me, and I am lifting Dunya out of poverty, and the only reason I can do that is because I was self-serving in my youth and saved all my cash, and now I can do beneficial things like save poor, beautiful women. right? He has this utilitarian view that is also selfish.
Right.
So the book framework has selfish characters and selfless characters. Raskolnikov and Sonia exist almost on like the lower class version of this, or if you want to call it like a more extreme version. Their poverty necessitates them to take more extreme actions. Sonia as a prostitute, Raskolnikov as a murderer. And then like Dunya and Lucin's relative middle classness means that they don't have to be as extreme, but their actions are still in the same type as the other two. They're just sort of like more socially acceptable. She's a gold digger, or she's marrying for money. He is
marrying with money.
He's marrying with money and knows it, and is kind of like a pompous rich jerk.
Right.
And is willing to be selfish for his own gain, just like Raskolnikov. But Lucin's not murdering, Raskolnikov is. Okay, so Raskolnikov and Lucin, you can see them as foils for each other. Dunya and Sonia, Russian names in this book. You can see them as foils for each other, and then you can kind of like cross-foil each other and make claims about like, because they're Lucin, Dunya, because they're sort of a higher class than Raskolnikov and Sonia, their sort of personal ethic plays itself out in less extreme ways, right? Now you're saying something interesting about, if Lucin was poor, would he murder? Like if he still has the same ethic as Raskolnikov, so maybe he would. Anyway, the point being in showing this is not to debate these characters, is to show that the power of contrasting, the power of using the foil in literature can open up the story to talk about these norms, can open up the story to talk about how these characters are different. Okay, so what?
Yeah, because I feel like I'm used to hearing a foil brought up as like a positive or a negative foil, or in your Hamlet example, you're looking for who handled this better than Hamlet. But with your Crime and Punishment example, they're all bad people, aren't they?
Well, Sonia and Dunya are trying. It's self-sacrifice.
I was just thinking between Lucin and Raskolnikov.
And even weirder is the Lucin and Raskolnikov interaction. When Raskolnikov says to him, as Lucin talks about his ethos, he says, "If you follow this to its conclusion, you can slit throats."
And Lucin's like, my good man, my good man. Of course not.
And it seems like Raskolnikov has a disdain for it, but the thing
even
is
though he does it,
but then he did it. Like he followed it to its natural conclusion and slit some throats.
Kind of didn't want to. I don't know. Anyway,
he did it because he wanted to prove that he was like hardcore.
Raskolnikov. I was thinking of, because after he gets caught by the lady, what's it called when you sell stuff to?
Oh, the pawnbroker.
After he kills the pawnbroker, someone just like sees him. Is it the pawnbroker's daughter?
His sister.
Sister. But anyway, like that one's an accident.
He kills her too, not an accident.
He didn't come there intending to kill
her or her kid
her baby.
So sorry, I'm used to thinking of, that was a tangent. I'm used to thinking of foil as like, there's the main character who does something wrong. The foil is kind of how they should have handled it, or a better example. And that's probably too simplistic.
I think that is the first step.
Right.
So with Hamlet and Laertes, that's the first step.
Sure.
Like who's doing this better?
Right.
But continuing with the foil, you're right. Like when you get to a more complicated book of relationships like Crime and Punishment, it's not is Raskolnikov or Lucin handling it better. It's the comparison of these characters is the point I was making with that is the extremity of poverty. So the fact that Raskolnikov is desperate means that his philosophy, his personal ethic is going to play itself out in a harsher way than Lucin, who is not desperate.
Sure.
But they still have the same philosophy in kind. They just have a different philosophy and degree.
Sure.
And you don't notice that until you start doing that foil comparison. Now, Raskolnikov also gives us license to do that because he does it himself in the book. But since Raskolnikov does it himself in the book with Lucin, it should give the reader license to start doing with everybody else in the book.
Right.
So then Raskolnikov gives you license to compare Dunya and Sonia because he does it. He's like, my sister, you're just like Sonia, selling yourself for cash. And it's like, well, she is, but not really.
There's also a direct able comparison we haven't mentioned yet, which is with Raskolnikov and Razumikin.
Yeah.
Right? Razumikin is another student who has fallen on hard times, doesn't have the money to continue his studies, but his solution is to work. He's going to make some translations, make a little money on the side, and he's got money to give away because he's actually getting some. And he says, it doesn't really matter what the original text is anyway, because no one can tell I'm doing it wrong. So I might as well translate it, good or bad, and make a couple bucks off of it. He's really nice to everybody. There's no reason for him to hurt anyone. And he just has all these grand plans about how he's going to make some cash and help his entire community. It's the same as Raskolnikov, but through pulling up his bootstraps and get some work done rather than murdering somebody and taking all their stuff.
Yeah, Raskolnikov wants... So both of them are willing to do hard things to get ahead. But the hard thing that Raskolnikov is willing to do is murder, whereas the hard thing Razumikin is willing to do is honest work. And Razumikin really is like how to win friends and influence people kind of guy.
Sure. Everybody just loves him, naturally.
Yeah. Whereas Raskolnikov is, how to hate everybody and alienate everybody. Anyway, so why do this? It doesn't just help you internalize the book. That question of what we did with Hamlet and Laertes, who did it better? What are we actually trying to get to with that question?
If I'm under stress or when something bad happens to me, how should I respond?
Yeah, we're trying to get to some kind of
moral
some sort of ideal decision, or like what is the ideal type of person?
Sure.
And this ends up being the big kind of fruitful questions for literature that they can help sort of form the reader, is a struggle for the ideal type. Now, Henberg, you are better at giving like a little rundown of what we mean when we say the ideal type. What do we mean when we say ideal type?
The notion of the ideal type is saying that there is a right way that men should behave and conduct themselves in the world, and much of the discussion of philosophy and ethics has been aimed at determining what that ideal type is. But whereas probably the current ethos, moral relativism, says there is no ideal type. You can be whatever you want to be. The type is whatever you choose. Most of philosophical history has claimed that there is some ideal type. And that's not just Christianity, which would say Jesus is our ideal, but Plato had an ideal type, Aristotle had an ideal type, even the Stoics had an ideal type, almost even Nietzsche. Nietzsche's ideal type was the criminal. He's somebody who lives according to their own law, right? That he even said so, right? The Superman is akin to the criminal. And then most philosophers say this is how man should behave, and so discussing the ideal type is what we're doing. Yeah,
so if in Megby's last episode we were having a conversation about the ideal type, but we were doing it from sort of a rational philosophical framework discussion.
Kind of a higher level of which of these ethical frameworks is better than another one.
Yes.
As opposed to...
Doing it in this way, you have a sort of a human level story, and you are asking those normative questions about what is the ideal type by talking about characters and how they interacted in a story. Is Hamlet going about this the better way, or is Laertes? Is Fortinbras going about this the better way, or Hamlet? Is Hamlet's feigned madness a useful thing? Is Ophelia's, or is it feigned? Is Ophelia's feigned madness or unfeigned madness a useful thing, a sort of like pressure release or not? Is she speaking truth to power? Is Hamlet speaking truth to power? Is there actually a difference between what Sonia and Dunya are doing, just because there are degrees of respectability about prostitution versus marrying for money? Is Lucen as bad as a murderer or not? And I think these are actually open questions, even though that they are both operating from the same kind of like selfish place. Right. Clearly, Razumikin is going about life better than Raskolnikov, but they're animated and motivated by the same things. So, if Raskolnikov and Razumikin come from the same context, why are they operating in different ways? Why is what Razumikin doing a satisfying life, and what Raskolnikov is doing is an unsatisfying life? And by sort of having these characters, I'm contrasting them to each other. In having a conversation about this, you are getting to or trying to uncover that ideal type, and say, like, what is the attitude, behavior, decision making, the way someone comports oneself that is the best way for a human person to sort of exist, given the contexts of the world that they get thrown at.
Yep.
Like when we talk about, in your last episode, if we talked about like a objectivist, well, we're sort of like plucking somebody from a context and saying, here are the characteristics of an objectivist. And I think that's a totally fine thing to do. And then if we were to say, like, here's Raskolnikov or here's Hamlet in a context, let's talk about their decisions that they're making.
Sure.
They're now in an actual living, breathing story where people are behaving and they're reacting to that behavior. Analyzing them is very different than talking about a-ism.
Sure, and same with if Hamlet and Laertes are your comparison, neither of them is perfect in their response. In the way that when you analyze a philosophy, you can have essentially a perfect view.
Yeah.
But the trolley problem brings us out. You don't get to be perfect. You don't get to have perfect outcomes. So having to deal with it in either you're bloodthirsty or you're inert, pick one. It makes it interesting. Again, yeah.
Whereas if you were to write, so this is sort of the nuance I was even thinking about in the last episode, is if you were to write the story of the trolley problem, as opposed to just have the like lab experiment, if you were to write the story of the trolley problem, you would have a character who would say things like, should I pull a lever? Well, how did this even happen? Am I on a prank show? Right? The context of a person in the real life of a real life scenario isn't going to be the same thought process as, I'm an objectivist. How would I deal with this?
Well, and then you make another character who is cajoling him, trying to get him to pull the lever, but isn't willing to pull it themselves. And then you have the guy that walks by, like, "What are you doing?" and pushes him out of the way, and then yanks the lever. Right. So
there's a book called The Sunflower that is about an incident during World War II. This is brief aside. Sorry. Where there's a Jewish man at a concentration camp, and he's working every day. One day is pulled out of the group, taken to the bedside of a dying German soldier, and the German soldier asks him for forgiveness. The German soldier says, "Please, would you forgive me for what I've done in my life?" And so then the book is a series of essays responding from all these different philosophical and religious viewpoints as to this is a real story that happened. How should this person respond in that moment? So that's another way of doing it, where you essentially build out the story and give the different viewpoints as to what someone should do if you are an egoist or a utilitarian or a pick your category. So that'd be another way to do it.
And then, so this is how you use that tool to compare these characters. So if you were doing it in a classroom or doing it with yourself, you would get out a sheet of paper and you would start writing the similarities and the differences between two characters that are in similar contexts. And then from there, you start to ask these kinds of questions. So we've been doing that. The next level of this is to then actually see, the piece of literature itself ends up acting as a foil to me as the reader. So the way that the book answers these moral questions or goes about these problems, and my reaction to it is supposed to sort of help me sort of understand myself. How can I give an example of this? So if you if you're watching, like, if you have a group of people and you're all watching a horror movie, and some people just like love the scenes where everyone gets cut up, and some people are horrified of it, and some people just are so satisfied that the bad guy gets caught at the end, and some people are so like kind of cheesed off that the bad guy didn't get away with it. The question is, should we be, if you are one of those kids watching that movie on a sleepover, has that movie, your reaction to that movie, has it told you something about yourself?
Yes.
And has it also sort of told you something about your friends who are reacting in different ways?
Sure.
Yeah.
This feels the same as, again, the trolley problem last time. You all had immediate responses.
Yeah.
It tells you something.
I'm not sure I want to hang out with the kid that really loves the cut up scenes.
Yeah.
That doesn't seem like a fun kid to hang out with.
But I mean, on the other hand, like,
Don't you like horror movies?
Oh, I love horror movies.
Do you like the parts where people get cut up?
Not
Oh,
particularly.
okay, just making sure.
is it actually a reliable
Yeah.
thing? Do you think it is a reliable thing to say, like, oh, when I read a book, like, for example, I really hate Catcher in the Rye. I hate that book.
Yeah, it's
the first
not-
time I read
not
it,
my
I threw it
favorite.
across the room. Literally, I was like, ugh, and I just chucked it. Was my disdain or disgust at that book worth analyzing to understand myself, or is it just like it was a crappy book? Like, I guess my point is, should the person, when they read something that affects them, should you spend the time trying to sort of understand the source of your disgust?
Can I say yes? I don't. You're probably moving toward a no, but my response in saying yes is that, like, the book should stay with you for a while. So initial, you read Hamlet. Laertes really sticks with you as a character because you're a foolhardy person. You just like taking action. So that example, just kind of kicks around your mind for a while. That doesn't mean that your initial reaction is the same one you'll have, but at least to look at, why am I so drawn to this character and not this one? Why am I disgusted by this character and not this one? Again, if you only read a classic once, you haven't read it at all. And so to let it stay with you is to kind of grow with it, right?
Yeah, I think sort of the point I'm saying, and AJ, you were saying this earlier, it's like, oh, well, I see a lot of Hamlet in me. I think that is a helpful thing for the person to do when they read books is, what do I find interesting, or what do I see in myself in a character, and comparing that to the idea of, like, the ideal type. Is this a good thing that I have this quality and this characteristic, or is this a bad thing that I have this quality or this characteristic? And then we've got a little audience laughing at us outside. I don't know if you can hear the giggles.
Are there students out there?
Yeah, there's some students. There's the kids who work here to clean who sweep the
Like,
floors.
it's the weekend. Tell them to go home.
Yeah. So I guess my point being that is that
You
when
agree
you're
with that?
reading books,
The answer you would say is yes.
I think it is. The answer is yes. Like, when you are reading something, and you should always be asking yourself, why do I like this thing? And is it actually, sort of worth liking? Why do I hate this character? Do I hate this character for the right reasons, or do I hate this character because they remind me of me and I hate that about myself?
Sure.
And that books should end up becoming like foils for ourselves, in order for us to kind of sort of understand ourselves.
For example, why do I love, what's it called? One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, and you hate.
And I hate that book.
One Flew Over the Cuckoo's
Nest. Yeah. Now,
Nest.
do I hate that book because I have, because of the reasons that I think why I hate it, or do I hate it because there's something about the book that reminds me of me that I dislike about myself? I don't know. I actually don't know.
And maybe I
Actually,
love
no, I
it
do.
because I really love the idea of a licentious freedom. Maybe that's what I need to investigate in myself. Like, am I secretly a Christian who just would love to have a day where I can just do whatever I want to?
Yeah, maybe I hate that book because I don't like when people just like get to do whatever they want because it makes me feel uncomfortable.
Yeah,
I don't know. I mean, that's a bad characteristic to have. Is that a characteristic of the ideal type?
Sure. And but then this is an argument for reading books together and then talking
Yes.
about, okay, this is what I like, this is what I didn't like. And then, again, the strength with which you hated a character is the strength with which someone else loves that character.
Yes.
And then this is the same point from before of people will have an immediate reaction to an ethical situation. Then having that discussion of why is really important. Same here of, again, maybe you're right about One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest and Graham is wrong.
Oh, yeah, that's true.
That's the obvious.
Obviously.
But it gets, now, just a point of warning, going back to our example of the kids watching the horror movie, and AJ, I do agree with you, the kid that's like ends the movie and is like, I love blood. You're like, okay, you know what? You're not coming over next time.
Right.
But
Can we watch the machete scene?
Yeah.
No, man.
No, go
Gross.
to bed. Go to sleep. But there is a word of warning that should be placed wherein, like, you can't, judging someone's reaction to a story it's really hard for you to draw conclusions about that person. It's probably a better exercise done for oneself than it is done for somebody else. I mean, and this is even something that happens in the play of Hamlet. Hamlet says, hey, if I put on this play depicting the murder of my father, and I judge my uncle's reaction, who I think is the murderer, then I can know what's going on in his heart. And it turns out that when he does it, he's right. He does know what's going. Like the scene did affect Claudius, and Claudius sort of does tip his hand, and Hamlet does know what's going on in the guy's soul. But I don't think that this is this is not a foolproof way of like building a relationship. Like if you're having, I don't know, you wouldn't do this with your spouse. You know, like go watch a movie, and if she like loves the scene where the husband dies, be like, oh no, right?
But there are things. There is an element of that when you're dating, where if they don't like the same stuff you like, it might be a good litmus test.
I don't know about that.
Hanging out.
No, I understand. It's just like I feel like when you're trying to apply that metric, or you're trying to apply that tool to somebody else, it's so complicated that I feel like the potential that you make the wrong conclusion, there's so much margin of error that it's almost not worth doing than if you're doing it to yourself.
For example, the kid who loves the blood scenes, maybe it's because it reminds him of hunting with his dad.
Yeah, you know what?
He wants to be a doctor.
For sure.
He wants to be a doctor. Yeah. He's interested in physiology.
Yeah.
I think the point is more that those reactions are avenues to talking about a philosophy that this is, I think what you're saying about my episode, it's like, it's really hard. No one's going to, there's a small group of people who would say, I'm an objectivist, I'm an egoist, I'm a virtue ethicist. But most people kind of, they can't talk about it as abstractly as that, so you can embody it in a story and then say, which of these characters is the most interesting, or which of these do you associate with the most? And so you learn something about the other person, but it's not, you can't just judge the emotional reaction. It then has to lead to, okay, tell me why this character is interesting to you. Am I understanding that correctly?
I think so. And then the other thing you can add on to this is also doing the power of rereading books is also the power of sort of seeing your own change as a person over time. So, for example, this past summer I reread Lord of the Rings, and I don't think I had read it since college. And I remember the last time that I read it in college, when I read it, I would read the parts that didn't have Aragorn in it fast, because I wanted to get to the parts with Aragorn, because I loved the character of Aragorn. You know, he's cool. He's the king. He throws down. He can the girl falls in love with him. You're like, I can't be with you. I have to be with my beloved. And as a 21-year-old man, you're like, yes, that's what I want. You know, I love this guy.
You want to turn down ladies?
Yeah,
that was your dream?
Of course. And then
flocking after you and be like, sorry, take it.
No, there's someone else. And this idea that he's got this like destiny of like being the king of Minas Tirith. Minas Tirith, yeah, right? Right. You, as a 21-year-old, you read that, you love it. Okay, when I read it this past summer, I just loved the story of Sam and Frodo, specifically Sam. When Sam, a simple country gardener thrown into this adventure, has to find courage, doesn't really know what's going on, but is just along for the ride, and by the end, sort of finds himself as Samwise the Brave, and then also Frodo, the person who his heroism comes not through feats of strength, but through like single-mindedness, endurance of pain. Right. I just found those to be so affecting. So much so that I was I was flying to Canada this summer to see my family, and I was on the scene where Sam thinks Frodo has died, and he decides that he will take up and be the ring bearer. I literally cried on the airplane, not audibly in a way that the guy next to me was weirded out, but I was just so moved by it. I was just so moved by, and whenever they talked about wanting to go back to the simplicity of the Shire, it hit me like in a sort of a strong way. Like I too wanted to go back to the simplicity of the Shire and the beer and the pub and making cheese and like growing gardens and that kind of thing. Okay. A psychologist could probably have a field day over the change in Graham Donaldson from 21 to 38 based on what I find resonant in the story. But personally, what one should do is when they look at that, they can say, okay, so what about what is the ideal type am I resonating with here? Well, there, Sam's desire to like live a simple life in a good home, but he has to do this difficult thing that he doesn't want to do, but he's doing it anyway. Those are valuable lessons. I don't know. My point being that I think it is a fruitful exercise for the reader when they're reading to keep notes, to write things down. I don't know if you go as far as journaling your thoughts, but to keep some sort of record of your reading so that if you do go back and reread the book, you have a record of the reading that when you were younger, that now that you're older, you can see either the growth, not even just the growth, but just the change. And that change is actually, I think, kind of a like rewarding thing to see.
I think this is why marginalia is so important.
Exactly.
Reading with a pencil.
Yes.
When I go back and I look at the passages I marked, I was like, what was I thinking?
Mm-hmm.
And you can sort of see this chronicle of your own change over time just in what affects you.
And if you do that, if you sort of keep a record of yourself vis-a-vis the books as a foil to yourself, then there's something where you feel like you have taken more control of your own headspace than if you're just sort of like a slave to the everyday, or you're just sort of like being, if you're sort of unthinkingly going through life and you're not reflecting on your place in it, and reflecting on your change on your place in life, then understanding yourself is going to be missed. So the foil is not just to sort of land the plane here. The foil is not just to compare characters, but it's the act of comparing characters. You can then begin to compare characters to yourself. And then if you continue that process through time, you've almost kind of like built up this compendium. This is why commonplace books are so important, that you can sort of have this record of your relationship with your own soul by going through these stories.
Sure.
And so...
Well, really, you're just testing. It's a continuous testing of a character to the ideal type. Is this what does it reflect in me that isn't in the ideal type? What are they doing wrong? I mean, it's the basic practice of fiction and literature, which is it's a low stakes way to test our own reactions. Right? Should that guy have done that thing? Well, would I have done that thing? Maybe. And looking at philosophies as they work out in the world. Right? We talked about in Magby's episode about all of these different ethical frameworks, and we had characters that we could say, well, this is a character that actually tried to live that out, and it didn't really go so well for these few reasons, right? So I don't think I'm going to do that framework. That is, like I said, it's a low stakes way of working things out in the world without having to do it ourselves.
And anyway, so that's it's a shorter episode, but that's sort of what I wanted to sort of show is that when you sort of like have a book and even have a literary device, and you work your way out, you can begin to apply that literary device not only just to the job or the work of analyzing literature, but then using it on you as a reader. The muscles of reading others, it can be turned on yourself, and you can read yourself, and sort of almost take some kind of agency in understanding you as you exist through time, right? Like I now look back and I can see the 21-year-old Donaldson reading this book, thinking that he, wanting to be king, right. And now I have the 38-year-old Donaldson reading the book, wanting to be a simple gardener, right? Like there's something in the ideal type,
palpable shift.
Yeah, but there's something in the ideal type in both of those things. It is appropriate for a 21-year-old to want to, romanticize going off and finding some sort of like kingship in the world, just as there's probably something appropriate for a 38-year-old to want to have sort of like a settled, rooted existence.
Yeah,
but willing to take up difficulties if those are the days you're called to.
What I love is that in the original definition from the handbook to literature, it says a foil is the thing you put behind a jewel. So in this case, you're the jewel, Graham.
There
right?
Yes.
So the foil is behind you to bring out your own brilliance. And so on that note, we'd like to end the episode with Graham as a brilliant jewel, as I always knew he was. So this has been Classical Stuff You Should Know. You can check us out on the internet all over the place. You can email us at theguys@classicalstuff.net, which is our website, classicalstuff.net, where you can find back episodes and paintings to go along with the episodes. And you can also donate to us on Patreon if you like our stuff. And with that comes some perks. You get ad-free episodes if we ever have ads. We have occasionally. And you also get some other perks. So you can get in-between episodes. And if you go with the highest tier, you can get a free sweatshirt and a pair of Crocs, which is super fun. You can also find us on Twitter, CLSSCAL Stuff. And you can find us other places too. You know, wherever podcasts are made and sold. So on the marketplace of podcasts, that's where we're at.
Slinging podcasts.
Slinging podcasts all day. Stop by our booth and get yourself a nice hot podcast.
Hey, Governor, get your podcast.
Anyway, this is Graham, Thomas, and AJ signing off.
Ciao.
Bye.
See you later.